Hi, welcome to my new episode. Today it's not going to be stand-up comedy. I want to give a commentary on my experience as a juror. I spent 3 days on a jury on a criminal trial last week. And the jury system in the United States, for those who don't know, all US citizens are required, when asked, to be on a jury. So we get summons in the mail when the court system needs jurors. And I've had many summons, maybe three or four in the past. Most times it didn't work out because they didn't need me. They didn't call me in the end. But this time they called me to come to the courthouse. So I went there and I was part of the 200 or so people who were called that day for cases that were going on. What happens is I ended up being the 45 people who got called into a court. There are many courts within the building. Many cases are going on. Judges can call the jurors, potential jurors, into the court. And we all went in, we walked in, and as soon as we walked in, all the attorneys stood up, the defendant stood up, the judge stood up, everybody was standing up. First time for me in a court in the United States, and it looked like a classroom, really. And the judge was sitting in the middle, and you got a court clerk and a couple of bailiffs or sheriffs, and the defense attorney, the prosecuting attorney, the defendant, and then we sat in the back, 45 of us. And then they called 12 or 14 names initially, 12 plus two alternate jurors. That was the idea. They called 14 names to go up and sit in the juror box. And my name wasn't called, so the 14 of them were there. And the judge gave out the general instructions and what it is to be on a jury, and also started asking questions, scenarios. And most importantly, I think he was trying to get to people. For example, if you have been a victim of a crime, or you know somebody close to you have been part of a crime, been victim of a crime, then you told the judge, all right? So usually what happens is, and if you have any other biases that prevented you from serving on this particular case. Now, this particular case was a gentleman being charged with assault with a weapon, a gun, assault with a gun with the intent to commit murder. That's the highest charge. And then there were other charges, bodily damage, and assault and battery, etc. So we knew as we sat in the courtroom what this case was about. The defendant was there. Then the judge asked the jurors, potential jurors, questions like, what do you think about guns? And then a few jurors said they have a problem with citizens owning guns. So the defense attorneys asked those two jurors to leave. So they are no more part of the jurors. So when each person gets disqualified or removed from the jury, a new name gets called in. So this went on for about 10, 15 minutes with different questions. Usually the questions come down to bias. Okay, can you be impartial? Can you carry out the law when you're part of the jury? You can't have biases based on race, religion, gun ownership, and all those things are important here. So eventually I was sitting there and my name wasn't called. Many people went in, some people left from the jury box. So we still have about 12, 14 people there. And then finally, it so happened my name gets called. And I get in on the box, and the judge asked me, do you have any issues with all the things that were said? If I had any issues, I could have spoken up, and maybe I would have been let go of the jury. One of the questions the defense attorney asked me was, what's my opinion on guns? And my opinion on guns, the way I grew up, was we didn't have guns. Citizens didn't have guns. But having lived in this country for 30 plus years and then knowing the laws in this country, a citizen is allowed to have guns to protect themselves and use them for personal defense. So if it came down to self-defense, then I told the attorney that I am fine at the point when it's self-defense to be able to use a gun. So with that answer, they were both satisfied. They let me be on the jury. If I had given an answer saying I was against individuals owning guns, then I would probably be out of the jury. I didn't truly believe that. I didn't think that actually anyway hurt me being impartial. So I needed to be impartial, be able to provide justice, because this was serious. This was somebody's life, somebody's future. So with that, I was part of the jury, and finally the jury was set. 12 people and 2 additional jurors. So then officially the case can get started now. Everybody else was asked to leave. So it was just the 12, 14 of us. And then the judge asked us to explain the case. The case was not very unusual, where a neighborhood squabble or a fight starts, and then one person ends up using a gun and shoots a person. Thankfully, there is no life was taken in this case. The person who was injured was in the hospital for several months. The fight started because you can imagine it's a very simple issue, but somebody came, asked for help to the defendant, and the defendant agreed to help this girl or a woman. And when he agreed to that, the woman's boyfriend came, was upset, and started arguing with this defendant. And they both got into arguing matches, and pretty soon it looks like they were into some kind of a tussle. The boyfriend's dad also came, and now the 2 of them were holding this guy back. And the way it was explained to us, the defendant was trying to leave the house. He said, enough of this, I'm going to leave the house. And while he was leaving the house, he had a gun in his hand, and he claimed that this was self-defense. He felt threatened because the 2 people who were taking him on were in the neighborhood. They've lived in the neighborhood, they might have had friends. So this was what happened. He ended up shooting the gun at the father, and the father gets injured in the stomach. And after that, he leaves the scene. The defendant leaves the scene, and later the father is taken to hospital, etc. And he survives, but he takes several months. The defendant then calls the cops after about 12 days and surrenders. He confesses to the crime and surrenders. So this was a case that was presented to us, okay? And what happened was the presentation of the case by the prosecuting attorney. They brought in witnesses. The witnesses were brought in. Several police officers came. A couple of neighbors, a mechanic who was on the scene talked about it. And the defense, it's the prosecution's job to prove that this was not self-defense, meaning the defendant used the gun where he didn't need to use it. But the defense and the defendant's statement was he felt threatened because he was by himself and he was in a neighborhood that was fairly rough neighborhood in the city. So this was the case we were given, and once the evidences were presented, we saw all the evidences, pictures, witnesses came and talked about it. Then it was time for jury deliberation. So the 12 of us had to decide how this case went, what the verdict was. It's a big decision because, it was a question of somebody's life, but he did shoot somebody. So going into deliberation, my thought process was I wasn't sure exactly. For one, I knew this was a little too much, So I went into the room, and the first thing we did was take a vote and see who thought where we were. Right away, majority of the people felt it was self-defense. Only few of us were still on the borderline. And maybe in an hour, when I started really thinking about the case, I realized the prosecution didn't provide enough evidence. So one of the big evidence, the person who started the fight, the boyfriend who started the fight with the defendant, did not appear as a witness. The father came in as a witness, but the father's statement basically was he got shot and he was trying to prevent his son and defendant from fighting. But the thing was, the prosecution never presented enough evidence to show that the defendant did not, feel threatened. So, in essence, we all concluded that defendant felt threatened, and he was in a neighborhood that he wasn't sure what else weapons the boyfriend and the father could bring, or if they can bring other friends over. So he was ready to leave the house. And at that point, he wanted to get out and he would do anything to leave the scene. The other issue people had a problem with is he did not wait there for the cops to come after he shot him. Luckily, we had a juror who happened to be African American. The defendant was African American. The person he shot was African American. Luckily, we had an African American lady who could explain to us what it means for if an African American man calls the cops with a gun on the scene. And that's a dangerous situation. It could be a dangerous situation for him. And he called 12 days later to confess the crime. And why did he wait 12 days? That was another question. So similar, the answers came in, and slowly I think all of us were convinced that this was personal defense. Remember, the jury is made up of 12 people. 9 could be classified as white, racially, and 2 of them were African Americans, and it was me, third person. So we were 12 from different walks of life. We had all different jobs: teachers, hospital workers, business owners, people who worked in factories, people who worked in pizza shops, supermarkets, young, many of them 30, 35-year-old men, a few older women, a few older guys, including me, along with it. So there was all kinds of age ranges. The diversity was there. A few people were gun owners who talked about it and about being a gun owner and what it means. So all of those things were in the deliberation room. Very interesting experience. When I came out of it, I wasn't very sure if I wanted to be part of the jury. But after going through this, then I'm pretty convinced that I did the right thing to go through the process. So we came up with our decision, a verdict. It has to be unanimous. Everybody has to agree. And then we told the judge we are ready. And then we went and sat in the juror box in the court. And the judge would ask the foreman of the jury. We selected one person as a foreman. And he would, we read out the verdict as not guilty in all the charges. And the judge would ask each one of us if we agree with it. And there, the case got done. The defendant was not charged with any crime. And after the case, the judge came and talked to us in the jury room. And he agreed that he would have gone this way as well, because based on the evidence that was provided. But he said even if he had gone the other way, he would have been fine. Then the defense attorneys and the prosecuting attorney came and talked to us to give them our feedback, so they can understand what went right, what didn't go wrong, what went wrong. So we told them exactly that if we had more evidence, maybe if things would have been different. If it had been a different scenario, if it was not in your his house, if he had gone with a gun somewhere else, if he had shot multiple times, because he had only one shot. That was another thing that came into the picture. So these cases are very difficult. It looks like a very simple case, but it's always a lot of factors have to be looked into. But ultimately, is the jury impartial? Can make a judgment using the given law with only the evidence. We can't use other information. That was very important. We got to use the information, the evidence that was provided, both the attorneys, the evidence of the witnesses and the testimonials. So with all of that, this was a fantastic experience as a U.S. citizen, and I think I didn't understand exactly what this process was, but after going through this, I think I have a better appreciation for the American judicial system. The democracy is at work. I have a better appreciation of the U.S. citizens and ability to sit down and actually make a decision using the evidence provided and not be impacted by so many other things. There was no racial issue here. I didn't see any racial issues among the jurors, and although it could have come in. So as an Indian American, I wanted to be, at some point during the process, I wanted to be part of the jury, because I realized the defendant was African American and the majority of the jury There was only a couple of African Americans there. So I felt like if I was part of the jury, I could probably bring up issues and be fair, make sure it is fair. And that was my thought process somewhere in between the selection process. So I had no issues serving on it. Luckily, it was a 3-day process. If it was anything longer, it was a tough. It's not an easy process to have a jury system. India used to have a jury system in the late 60s, but I think they took it away for whatever reasons. Again, I think this is a great way for average citizens to be part of something in the country, to make an impact, and believe that they have the power to do these things. With that, I close this week, and this was just a commentary on my experience as being a part of a jury, and I hope many other citizens will participate in the jury system. Thank you.